So the first one that we've got is the Queen of England has announced age verification for porn sites. Now, I know this seems like a very little thing, but it's actually a very big thing, because she's not just talking about age verification in terms of you have to prove that you're 18 to get onto the site. She's saying that you have to prove you're 18 in order to see the site listed at all, meaning you'll have to find the address elsewhere as opposed to Google, as opposed to anywhere else, and then prove your age before it will show up in search results for you, or it will show up in any way, shape, or form for anybody else unless they've proven to their browser that they're 18. This is going to require regular, everyday users to supply some level of identification into their browsers in order to even see these type of results.
Right, and to be frank, I see this as, and they're going to use the excuse that, oh, we're just trying to protect the children, but obviously they're trying to police the internet because, well, for one, it's the UK, and they pretty much built their entire model based off of 1984 in a sense. So they want to know what everybody is doing at every given time for every given reason.
It's even worse than that. It's that they're building a model in which data collection for government purposes becomes the norm. I mean, they always start out with something that, like you said, for the children, or something that can be, implemented without much public outcry, because the public, especially in Britain, doesn't see the big picture most of the time. They just see it as something that, oh, well, and no one wants porn being shown to children, of course not. So just enter your ID here and don't worry about it. We're not going to use it for anything nefarious. And then all of a sudden it starts being used to enforce hate speech laws. Then it starts being used to enforce laws stopping criticism of the government. Then it starts being used to stop criticism of Brexit or the EU. And it just keeps going and going and going. Eventually you'll have to tie your bank account to it. And I'm not being overly paranoid. I'm saying these are things that many people have announced they want to see already.
Well, that's the amazing part. It's the Queen who sanctioned this and who told us that's the way it's gonna be. Like, it doesn't even matter which side of the political alignment you're in Britain. The Queen said it herself, so not even like the God Save the Queen people can say anything about this. Like, what the fuck, Queen Elizabeth? I thought you were cool.
Oh, no, but this is the classic pearl-clutching, think-of-the-children tactics that you always find any authoritarian using. It kind of doesn't matter what the prevailing morality is. You're always going to have people that use that prevailing morality and this plural-clutching, think-of-the-children, think women and children first mentality to rationalize their need for authority.
Right. They're trying to get you to basically accept giving up your privacy for the reasons, for whatever reasons they decide that is. And Halsey makes a very interesting point because at least in the West, they know that they couldn't just get away with just blatantly admitting it. Whereas in China, where you have like a more communist government, they really don't care. They say, yeah, we're monitoring you, and if you speak out against us, we're going to kill you.
Well, this also plays into, this is an example of the natural human bad habit of wanting to abdicate responsibility for security. Because that's effectively what this is doing. This is the government stepping in and saying, parents, you don't have to bother being good parents. We'll take care of this for you. Because, look, it's so big and scary out there on the internet. How could you possibly protect yourself, parents? How could you possibly monitor your children's internet habits, understand what they're doing, maybe do crap like, I don't know, not give them a smartphone and keep the computer in the living room so you can monitor what they're doing? No. You don't have to worry about that. The state will take over. And like Halsey's pointing out, it just sort of grows and creeps and continues because once they can get a toehold here, they can get people to further abdicate their own responsibility for the sake of security. And we know what Ben Franklin said about that.
It's also that they can take it that step further, that once they do assume responsibility for it, that parents will be outraged when bad things happen anyway. So they'll start calling for more government overreaction. They'll start calling for more government intervention once they've abdicated the responsibility to the government completely anyway. So all of a sudden, when they find out their kids are watching porn, or their kids are doing anything like going to a doll site, or going to anything that they disapprove of morally, intellectually, or politically, then all of a sudden the parents' outrage are going to say, when will it be, especially in the UK, when the parents say, oh, you've gone to a site that supports Brexit, you're obviously a right-wing nutjob. So we demand that you stop allowing these sites to be seen by children. And pretty soon it's very, very simple that you control entirely the political conversation without anyone even protesting.
Okay, it's great we have the IT people Shogun and Coyote on. So, what do you think? What do you guys think is actually gonna happen? Are they gonna have like the Great Firewall of the UK or something like that after this? Because what happened is after the article that went through in the EU, like basically banning memes online, like memes are copyrighted material now. What all the US service providers did after that is they implemented these crazy ass freaking cookies on all US sites. And now if you're a EU citizen, you basically have to click on this button, otherwise you can't view the site. And what some sites actually do is they block countries from the EU completely. So IT guys, what do you think is going to happen?
Well, one thing, this is just a blind assumption here, but I am assuming that the deep web is going to become a bit more popular.
You're eventually going to see a banning of VPNs because it doesn't matter what the government institutes as far as some great firewall, great Hadrian's firewall, whatever you want to call it. They're going to end up with the same problem that China has, which is if you allow any sort of encrypted traffic, you're going to have a blind spot in your surveillance. And so the easiest way to deal with that is to just not allow encrypted traffic. Now, China deals with that by just having government basically act as a man in the middle. So all of their internal financial transactions are effectively funneled to the government. Anytime you're trying to do anything on the Chinese internet as a Chinese citizen, registering any sort of encryption certificate
appreciate you carrying the turds torch in his absence.
They
even though you are a boomer Jew. Don't spend this money on Iranian
beer. They do a
beer.
pretty good job of blocking VPNs. I mean, if you hear what Sexy Cyborg has to say on the inside, you're constantly having to migrate your services, having to shift your IP addresses and try to avoid this sort of surveillance. And you just end up with this continual churn as they find the VPN and shut them down. So I wouldn't see it out of line to see in the next 3 to 5 years the EU and or Britain, whatever their status from Brexit is, instituting a general effective ban on VPNs, some sort of legislation that's going to require them to have the key to decrypt the traffic to observe things, ostensibly for the thought of protecting children. They're going to probably start with sex traffickers, then they're probably going to move into financial transactions, trying to prevent fraud, and then that's just going to allow them to creep into political discourse too.
And also, okay, I'm sorry, I forgot what I was about to say, but yeah, you're totally right on the VPN thing, because people's initial reactions are going to be like, yeah, we'll just get a VPN. But if you think that the government hasn't thought about that, then you're pretty much being naive. So
there's also two things that have been implemented in Europe already on a voluntary basis, which obviously voluntary always becomes mandatory when they decide, is that one, they can put a chip into your hand, into your your leg or anything, and that chip can have an RFID, which will automatically identify you as being you. So that's one way that they can actually move forward with stopping privacy and making sure that everything is fine.
Oh, well, I actually got some background on this. I've been researching near-field communication lately, and already in my country, over 50% of the people, well, the young people at least, have moved on to using banking services through their phones, and they're using chips with certain communication technologies inside their phones and paying for everything using that. And people do this because it's convenient. As long as it's more convenient for them to do so than it is dangerous, they will do it. Now, thankfully, as long as you have like phones, you can have a strong enough electronic field, and you can actually break these chips very easily. There was a news article, I think this happened in the US or UK, but some dude actually had like a big computer in his backpack, and he managed to intercept one of these communications with a man in the middle attack, and he actually got to steal some cash through that. So, but yeah, I think we're moving into a pretty dystopian future with technology like this.
I totally agree. I mean, I saw it coming a long time ago, but I'm real. No, I wouldn't even say that I'm surprised it's not happening. It's just now starting to happen. But yeah, the you see the government realizes that the internet is a really powerful tool, and a lot of information can get out on the internet pretty quickly. Memes are like a way of protests and a way of spreading a message. And as you already know, Google is already working to stop certain things getting out. Because if you haven't seen my video or the various videos that it's been talking about this recent Google leak, it's talking about this article. Basically talking about these documents that Google has explaining how they use their machine learning technology to essentially filter out anything that has to do with the right, anything that has to do with putting Trump in a positive light and promoting the leftist narrative. So if you search up certain terms, then obviously those things are not going to show up, or they're going to show things to the contrary in order to an attempt to sway you into believing something completely different. And ever since this video was leaked, then Google has been actively trying to suppress this information by and deleting the videos off of YouTube and so forth by saying that this is a privacy issue.
They
So
also have pushed it down in search results. So if you search for that actual video there in Google itself, you're not finding it. What you'll find is sometimes people's criticism of it. When you look at the articles about it, you'll see a CNN saying, "Oh, the results were not, the questions were not put in context, and he lied to her to get her in the first place." So I don't know if you know this, but Project Veritas told this woman that she was being interviewed for, I think, a scholarship on diversity or something like that. So she would just keep her mouth going and going and going. And she had no idea. So out of nowhere, when this thing came out, they're saying that she wasn't answering in context because she had a financial, stake in what happened.
right. And also, before I forget, this is something TFM has mentioned before, is that you can't. It's almost impossible to hide yourself from the government because, or at least from the U.S. government, because if the government wants to dox you, they can. They pretty much have everything. So yeah, no VPN will save you from the government.
Also, real quick, I'll say hold on a minute, like TFM does when we have a fake Celestina comment when someone puts one through Streamlabs. But Surplus Karma says, appreciate you carrying the Turge torch in his absence, even though you're a boomer Jew. Don't spend this money on Iranian beer. Thank you very much for support.
He's not wrong.
And maybe to put a even more horrific pin in this article to move us to the next one, this is before even considering any sort of biometric database that could be maintained. I mean, Britain is already the most surveilled populace in history, with the way they have CCTVs absolutely everywhere. It would be, I mean, they're still working on machine learning, but it would be relatively trivial to just layer a sort of biometric analysis program on top of that to observe all the video feeds and literally keep track of people. Just maintain a log of monitoring people as they leave their house, as they move anywhere in public. So they just have a consistent record of what every citizen is doing. And they've been slowly moving towards that.
You also have to remember, I don't know who here actually has a YouTube channel, but I get these alerts all the time that I violated the law in another country. And most of the time it's blasphemy laws. Like it'll say like, oh, this video violates blasphemy laws in Pakistan. You could be subject to arrest or criminal conviction if this video, if you were to show up in this country. And sometimes they even restrict my content based on how many different countries I violated. So it's actually a thing, and this is something they're already doing here. So I mean, it's already being put into place, and I know that Shogun talked about the dark web. I mean, for years and years, we've used the dark web as journalists to contact dissidents. I mean, I can't even tell you, I've written a dozen articles that I could put the links in later where I was talking to Iranian dissidents, through the dark web, because it's the only way they can reach out without worrying about the government getting a hold of them. That's slowly being eroded. More and more companies are being able to search the dark web. They're being able to find things on the dark web that they previously couldn't. I mean, right now, even your credit reports will say, oh, we found this on the dark web for you. So, it's becoming less and less of a safe haven for people already suffering under tyrannical regimes.
Right, and expect this to get worse and worse and worse and worse. And also, for those of you that are saying, well, I'm not doing anything wrong, so I have nothing to worry about. Well, frankly, you really do, because I was talking to this with one of my friends once, because I knew some guy that was basically had the same mentality that if you're not doing anything wrong, you don't have anything to worry about. But doing anything wrong, quote unquote, says who? If the government says that you're doing something wrong, and you don't and if it's not morally wrong or not wrong by common sense standards, you would think, then yes, you're still a criminal in a sense, because we're
That's
constantly, and know in the US we're constantly breaking laws that we don't even know exist, because that is, I saw a video on that on this channel called Liberty Pen. It's actually a pretty interesting one. But before I forget, my friend used this analogy, essentially saying this. Now, imagine if there was a hidden law on the book that said that you couldn't use more than, let's say, 1 teaspoon of salt a day, and you use like 2 teaspoons of salt because you're cooking this big dinner for like friends and family and so forth, and you need a little extra salt, and the government just busts in your house saying, "Okay, you're under arrest for using too much salt." I know it sounds ridiculous, but that's basically how ridiculous things are getting these days.
Well, I think you're identifying the twofold problem of, the legislation has just gotten completely out of control over time, and by several surveys, at any given moment, a U.S. citizen is violating 9 to 10 federal statutes just by existing effectively.
There have been plenty of
enforcement causes problems.
There have been a lot of politicians that have openly said that. They say that they make the U.S. legal code so overly burdensome and out of control on purpose, because at no point does anyone actually know, did they violate a law. The IRS tax code is absolutely like that. Everybody that I think files for a non-standard tax return violates at least 2 IRS laws every single time they do it, because there's no way to avoid it. That's why tax lawyers, you'll have 20 lawyers working on one return, because they want to minimize the amount of crimes you commit, not actually make sure you don't commit them at all.
Right.
And when you combine that with the growing sense of essentially retroactive cancel culture, you're going to see this growing point of, sure, you may take the mentality of, I'm not doing anything wrong, so I got nothing to hide. Sure, by whose metric, and how far into the future can you guarantee that? Like, at what point can you guarantee that the standard's not going to change and they're not retroactively going to decide that you have broken a bunch of laws and it's time to make an example of you?
That's the one thing that was sort of genius about the American Constitution, but this also bodes very poorly for us right now. If we had a robust enforcement mechanism for the Constitution, at least the people like us could know that something was being done. You could say, look, there's an absolute method for people to constitutionally review things. Things are being enforced. We have confidence in the system. But as of right now, there's absolutely no respect for the Constitution, and no one even knows what's going on left or right, whether something is against or for the Constitution. So at this point, we don't even have the pretend protections that they try to do it. So at this point, there's no confidence anyway that the laws they're passing are constitutional in nature, and challenging them takes years. So if they decided, we'll use Shogun's example of too much salt, right? They pass a law saying you can't use more than a scoop of salt, and all of us go, oh, but that's unconstitutional, right? But it doesn't matter, because no one seems to care. And even if you got locked up and put in a maximum security prison for 10 years, by the time the Supreme Court realizes or rules that what you did wasn't wrong, you've already served 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, actually, you hit on the exact reason why I'm generally against the death penalty, setting aside any sort of moral argument and retributive justice or anything like that. Just the sheer fact of the matter that the system is flawed and can cause problems. I'd rather not make a decision we can't even attempt to rectify if we discover we made an